We've still got folks coming in, but I'm going to jump in and start with our sort of opening remarks so that we can be respectful of everybody's time. I'm Ben Lyman. I'm a transportation planner with the Greater Madison MPO. I just had a temporary crown put in this morning, so if I sound weird or start drooling, I apologize. That said, welcome and thank you for joining us today for a joint webinar hosted by the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, and the Greater Madison MPO. We're excited to make the work we do more accessible and useful, and hope that the joint RPC and MPO webinar series, of which this is one, provides valuable opportunities for coordination and communication between our agencies, local communities, and other stakeholders. A few housekeeping items. Everyone is muted. This webinar is being recorded. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and please put questions in the Q&A. And we'll be monitoring the Q&A, and we'll answer as many questions live at the end as we possibly can, or just during the course, we might be able to respond in writing right away. We will also try and answer quick clarifications during the presentation if possible. There'll be 3 speakers today, beginning with Kathy Kuntz, Director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. Then we'll have Steve Steinhoff, the Director of the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. And finally, Bill Schaefer, the Director of the Greater Madison MPO. The presentation slide decks and a recording of this webinar will be available for review on the RPC and MPO websites after the event. And again, because we always get that in the chat, yes, this is being recorded, and yes, the recording will be available for you later on. When you registered, we asked who you represent so that we could understand a little bit more about our audience today. And so quick breakdown of the results of that poll. We've got 37% of you represent local government in one way or another, 15% with nonprofits, 13% with county and regional government. We've got 8% in education, 7% in state government, 5% in various business, including such things as UW Health, 3% for consultants. And so folks of you who work in the sustainability space got put in there as well. 1% for the federal government, and then 11% other, don't fit in any of those. So again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Kuntz, who's going to start with an overview of the Dane County Climate Action Plan and lay the groundwork for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Ben. Caitlin, can you give me control of the slides?
Yes.
So
sorry, I apologize.
So I'm Kathy Kuntz. I'm the director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. And some of you, I recognize familiar names in the list. It's good to be here with all of you. I appreciate the introduction. Ben, you know, our office is part of a long tradition of environmental leadership at the county level. For more than a decade, County Executive Joe Parisi has invested in energy efficiency and solar power and other clean energy strategies in county facilities. And really, our office is the extension of that commitment to environmental stewardship and climate leadership to the community level. The executive created our office in 2016 to really lead county-wide climate action. And I'm just going to pause a second. Caitlin, I'm not seeing maybe you can keep next slide. So we were really the culmination of this. Maybe a good example of the county's leadership is our renewable natural gas facility at the landfill, where we're capturing methane from the garbage and cleaning and compressing it into renewable natural gas. We use some of that fuel in our own county fleet. About half of our snowplows run on renewable natural gas. We also sell RNG to Quick Trip locally. So there's a lot of pieces of that. So the county exec established our office in 2016 to lead on climate action. And one of the first things we did was create a council on climate change to help us create a climate action plan. One of the important things for you to know about the climate action plan is the issues of equity and social justice are really woven into the fabric of the plan. From the beginning, it was our commitment to reduce emissions in a way that would also address some of the inequalities in our fossil economy going forward. Next slide. One of the other things for you to know about the plan is that we in the plan worked with the Wisconsin Initiative for Climate Change Impacts to understand the climate change that's already happening in Dane County. This week, it doesn't surprise any of you for me to say, by the way, Dane County is getting hotter and wetter. We've experienced both of those things in dramatic form this week. That's an important thing for us to think about in the context of this plan. Next slide. The other really important thing is that we understand where we're starting. So if we're going to talk about reducing emissions, what's our baseline? For our plan, the baseline is 2016, where all of us together, local governments, businesses, residents, we produce 7.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. And the pie chart gives you a sense of sort of the breakout of those emissions. So the biggest piece of our emissions in 2016 was from electricity. Historically, Wisconsin's electric grid gets power from a lot of coal plants and natural gas plants. So our electricity has been historically relatively dirty. We'll talk about how that's changing. The two pie slices next to that labeled residential and commercial, those are the emissions, the natural gas we burn in our buildings for space and water heating. So a little bit more than half of this pie is our built environment. And then you'll see that more than half of the rest of the emissions come from the transportation sector. So that just gives you a sense of where our priorities lie here when we're talking about cutting emissions. Those are going to be the pieces we pay the most attention to. Next slide. To create the plan, we convened a number of subject matter expert working groups. So we brought together experts on renewable energy and land use and all kinds of issues to develop recommendations. And those recommendations then went to the council for consideration and back and forth. There are more than 100 recommendations in the plan, but I'm not going to talk about 100 recommendations because that's insane. I'm going to give you sort of big buckets that you can think about these recommendations in. So really, when it comes to reducing emissions, almost everything we're doing falls in one of three big buckets. The first is about eliminating waste, because whether we're talking about electricity or gasoline or food, it's kind of crazy if we take raw materials, process them, refine them, move them around the country, and then bring them to your home or work and you toss them out. Okay, so we've got to get rid of all of that waste in the system. That's an incredibly important piece of this. The second set of strategies is around clean energy. The energy we need to use in the future needs to come from clean sources. That's electricity from solar and wind and RNG from the landfill and manure digesters. And then the final set of strategies is really about ensuring that we're using those clean energy sources rather than traditional fossil fuels. So it's transitioning our buildings away from natural gas and transitioning our fleet away from gas and diesel to electric and RNG. All of those things reduce emissions. Because Dane County is this amazing place with lots of natural land and open spaces, we've got a second set of strategies, Caitlin, and that's about increasing natural carbon sequestration. So we can increase the amount of carbon we're storing in plants and soils in a way that also helps us address these emission challenges. And so that's another piece of our plan that we'll talk a little bit about. So these are the big strategies. Next slide. Those strategies tie, though, to outcomes that we're pursuing, very specific outcomes. And this is a list of the outcomes in the plan that get us to a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. And this is a pretty ambitious list. And I want you to take a minute to really look at this list. And And Caitlin, you're going to be able to open a poll now for me magically. And we want your thoughts on just what you think where do you see the biggest challenge here? So we've got outcomes related to energy efficiency and solar and electric vehicles and VMTs. Take a moment there to just take a vote on where you think the challenge is the biggest. So pick something, and in a minute, Caitlin will tell me voting has mostly slowed, and we will look at your outcomes.
All right, we've had about half of people weigh in so far, so I'll keep it open for a few more seconds.
Okay. Which of those do you think is the biggest challenge just based on what you know?
All right, we're slowing down here, so I think we'll end it
Okay.
in a second. Got a few stragglers coming in. All right, we'll end the poll and share the results.
Okay, terrific. Wow, this is okay. I'm just going to say this is a really smart crowd because, if I had to pick two things there that I think are the hardest, it is reducing energy usage and VMTs. I used to think VMTs was the very hardest thing on this list, I should note. And then COVID happened and we started thinking about a lot of things that we didn't need to drive to do anymore. And so I think there's a way that the way we think about these goals evolves and we end up with opportunities. And maybe the other thing I should say about this list is, so if we achieve everything on this list, we can cut emissions in half by 2030. In all likelihood, we're going to overshoot some of these items and undershoot others. And I'm going to sort of talk about kind of where I think we're at with that. But let's, oh no, okay. So I'm able to do it all, maybe. I could close it. No, Caitlin, I can't move more. No. So I need you to next slide me. There you go. So if we hit those or the right combination of some overshoots and a few not very slight undershoots, we can cut countywide emissions in half by 2030. That's really significant because that's what the climate scientists are saying we need to do to really reduce the worst impacts of climate change. So and that's what's in the climate action plan. So the climate action plan is a really important document, but it is of course a plan. What really matters is what we get done now that we have a plan. So the climate action plan is just the beginning of this. Really for our office, there are 4 big priorities right now. The first is about engaging people in the plan, helping everyone in our community, local businesses, nonprofits, residents understand that we're all part of this solution. We can't get there without everyone. And that reducing emissions is an opportunity to create a more resilient, stronger Dane County going forward. So when I think about how we accomplish that, there are sort of 2 big categories of activities for our office. The first is about making it easy to take action, whether we're working with local governments or businesses or the faith community. We're always thinking about how do we make it easier for people to be part of the solution. We also spend a fair amount of time celebrating leadership because this is Dane County. We have a lot of amazing leaders, and we really want to do everything we can to help local folks be part of the solution. Today, I'm going to focus on that 4th bullet and really try to give you a sense of where we are on these climate targets and sort of what's happening forward. So next slide. And I'm going to do this using those big categories from earlier, because that's just sort of an easier way to think about this. So that first category, which is about reducing waste, I would say this is, and you thought this in the poll, that reducing VMTs falls here, energy efficiency falls here, water efficiency falls here. This is a really challenging category because it involves a lot of decisions a lot of people are making every day. Again, this is a place where we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make it easier for people to make sustainable choices. And both Steve and Bill are going to talk about some more ways that this comes together. But I would say this category of activities is going to be challenging all the way up to 2030 because we're going to keep trying to move folks down this continuum, but it's going to remain a challenging thing in various ways. The next category, by contrast, the renewable energy category, the transition from fossil fuels to renewables, this is going like gangbusters. Like, we are going to blow our goals in this area out of the water. I can tell you that right now. And that's largely because there is amazing economic momentum in our favor. So not only is solar more cost effective, solar and wind are now cheaper than natural gas or coal, but the renewable natural gas also has really terrific economics. So here I wanted to kind of give you a sense of where we are a little bit. So on the solar side, we've been installing, solar in a kind of aggressive way in certainly in Dane County for more than 20 years now. We have hundreds of rooftop solar installations on homes and businesses and faith communities. All in all, that totals about 25 megawatts of power. So that's the first kind of category of solar happening. Then we've got sort of a new category of utility customer partnerships. An example of this would be the project that the county did with MG&E at the airport, where MG&E installed 7 megawatts of power for the county's use at the airport. There are 5 of those installations in Dane County right now, and in total, they're about 60 megawatts. So that's interesting that those utility customer partnerships are already twice as much as all of that decades of solar kind of thing. It gives you a sense of what scale can do here. And then, of course, the last category are the utility scale solar and wind projects that are happening in the county, but also across the state that are benefiting the county. And those are typically 200 to 300 megawatt projects. So solar is happening at a variety of levels. The renewable natural gas is also happening at a couple of levels. I mentioned earlier the landfill. Here in Dane County, we have 2 dairy digesters, one near Waunakee and one near Middleton, both of which have now converted their operations. So they're taking dairy manure, they're processing it, capturing the methane, cleaning and compressing that methane, and they're bringing it to the landfill to sell into the interstate pipeline that runs under the landfill. So we're enabling them to have much more profitable RNG operations than they had before. So this area, we are going gangbusters. That next area then is the transition, our buildings and fleets to clean energy. And I would say this is a little bit of a mixed picture. So on the transportation side, things are going pretty well. You've probably heard that General Motors and other major auto manufacturers are starting to say that they see the sunset of gas vehicles. I think GM is saying 2035, they will stop producing any gas vehicles. Again, that's going to put us ahead of our schedule in terms of how fast those light duty vehicles are electrified. We're probably about a year away from cost parity where a new EV is going to cost the same amount as a new gas vehicle. An EV is already cheaper in total cost of ownership over the life of the vehicle than a gas vehicle, but we're going to be, so the economics there are moving fast. And on the heavy duty vehicle side, between renewable natural gas, electricity, and biodiesel, I think we're fast seeing good options for all of those kinds of heavy duty vehicles. So that market is moving at a pretty good clip. The building side of this is moving a little bit slower. And part of that is the HVAC, the heating and cooling systems in our buildings last a lot longer than cars do. So the turnover in those systems is a little bit slower. Also, for us in a cold climate, the transition to cold climate heat pumps from furnaces and boilers is a little bit of a mind shift. So we're going to take I think it's going to take us a little bit longer to get there. In the long run, the cost savings and the improvements in indoor air quality are going to mean that the buildings market moves too. But that's just, we're going to see less of the buildings market movement in this first decade than we're going to see of the EVs. The EVs are going to be pretty substantial by 2030. So next slide. other part of this I want to just touch on is the natural carbon sequestration. And here, in a way consistent with how we think about these things at Dane County, we're first starting with our own operation. So as folks know, we have a long tradition at the county of strategic land purchases that can help to improve water quality and flood mitigation, where we're helping like the Friends of Pheasant Branch buy additional land so that can be restored prairie and do some flood mitigation. We also have a continuous cover crop program where we're encouraging more continuous cover crops. Our Land and Water Resources Department is launching an initiative to start measuring what we're calling all of the ecosystem benefits of those projects. So historically, we've thought about how those things help us address flooding or how they might reduce phosphorus and nitrates in our lakes, but we also want to understand how they sequester carbon. So we're in the early stages of that work, but I think ultimately that's going to help us not only understand that for our own lands, but also for all of the other rural lands in Dane County, and that will be like an important step forward. Next slide. The other piece of this I want to mention is our office has undertaken a significant effort to bring people together to talk about tree canopy. And this ties back to my point about Dane County getting hotter and wetter. And so it turns out that trees might be our best resource when we're dealing with the challenges we have around the climate change that we're already dealing with. Not only do trees provide substantial cooling benefits, especially in urban areas, but they can also help soak up heavy rainfall more effectively. So trees have a lot of benefits. And so our office was super excited some months ago to realize that CARPC was doing some work to understand the tree canopy in Dane County. And their research shows us that since 2010, we've had a substantial loss in tree canopy in various parts of the county. Some of that's about development, some of that's about tree disease. There's a number of things playing into that. The CARPC maps, though, inspired us to convene a working group where we've got folks from multiple municipalities, different county departments, talking about that data and ultimately marrying that tree data with demographic data. So the map you see there is showing you where we have reduced tree canopy and where we've got vulnerable populations. So the red areas on the map are that crossover of vulnerable populations and less trees. And so we're in the early stages with that working group of developing strategies to work with communities to address some of these gaps. For more on this, Mel Askey in my office is doing a webinar next week. And if you email she or I, we can get you hooked up for that, because that's going to be an awesome discussion. Finally, closing, I just want to make one quick plug for our Climate Champions program. So I said earlier, lots of amazing things are happening in Dane County. We've got all kinds of businesses and nonprofits and local governments leading on climate action in a variety of categories. So 2 years ago, we established a recognition program really to celebrate all of that leadership. That program is open right now for 2022. I encourage you to check it out because we really love celebrating all the cool stuff happening in Dane County, because all of that helps us make progress forward. Nope, Caitlin, I was totally good. I was going to say, let's shift to Steve.
Great. Well, thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to see so many of you on the webinar today to learn about this very important topic. And following Kathy, I'm going to talk about the role of land use and development in meeting our climate targets. And just for those of you who don't know, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, or CARPC as we're known, is an independent unit of government, one of 9 regional planning commissions in the state, and we focus on land use, development, and environmental resource planning. So we think that a necessary foundation for tackling regional issues is a shared vision and plan for how the region grows. And in that vein, we launched and facilitated the initiative of Greater Madison Vision from 2016 to 2019 to bring together leaders, stakeholders, and the public to look at the changes that we face, the possible futures that we might experience, and to establish, and most importantly, shared values and priorities. The initiative culminated in a large public survey in late 2018 with more than 9,000 people participating. And the participants explored alternative futures, and they placed in rank order different strategies that reflected their preferred future. We compiled the priority rankings to identify shared regional priorities. The priorities selected most often out of the 16 choices offered were more renewable energy and green infrastructure, which is really briefly enhancing nature's capacity to absorb rainfall and snowmelt to reduce flood risks and otherwise improve ecosystems. So these graphs show that the survey takers selected these strategies as priority 1 through 4 out of the 16, or the top quartile, more than 3,000 times. So reducing climate change and becoming more resilient to its effects were a top priority for the region. And even though this is a few years old, I'm pretty confident that these priorities are still remain intact today. So then it became CARPC's job to apply the Greater Madison Vision priorities to the challenge of how we grow. So with more than 200,000 more people and about 100,000 more jobs coming to Dane County in the next few decades, managing that growth to address climate priorities was key. CARPC set out to prepare a regional development framework toward that end. In drawing on these regional priorities, we identified 3 overarching goals for the physical development of the region. One is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and foster community resilience to climate change. The other 2 are access to key opportunities to conserve vital resources. For this presentation, in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on the climate goal and its related objectives and strategies. So we then identified more specific objectives for each goal that most relate to land use and development, in which local governments are well suited to pursue. The objectives to achieve the climate goal are within the red dotted rectangle you see. One of the main ways that land use affects climate emissions is through its impact on transportation and buildings. You heard Kathy say that the transportation and the building sector represent about more than half of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in general, development that is more spread out and separated by use and car dependent causes people to drive more and generates more greenhouse gases. And secondly, communities that limit housing choices to larger single-family homes end up using more energy overall for heating and cooling. So the first objective is to increase the percent of development that is compact, mixed, walkable, and where feasible, transit supportive. If this is achieved, it will bring people closer to their destinations and make travel by foot, bike, and transit, as well as shorter car trips, more prevalent. It will also result in more housing choices, including smaller homes and multifamily buildings, which together reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The other 3 climate objectives you see focus on resiliency, increasing the tree canopy to absorb more carbon dioxide, increasing stormwater infiltration to reduce flood risk and other benefits, and reducing heat island effect to protect health and well-being. We then worked with local communities to identify the best and most viable growth strategies to achieve those objectives. One strategy is to focus growth in centers which we consider to be vibrant, walkable concentrations of housing, jobs, services, and civic places, and along the corridors that connect them. This map shows existing centers in green and expanded in new centers in blue, and the corridors in the blue lines. The Regional Development Framework locates about 40% of all growth over the next few decades within centers and along corridors. This represents a significant shift in development patterns from the past. Another strategy to prioritize growth in already developed areas is to promote growth prioritize growth in already developed areas, excuse me. And this results in more compact communities. It also generates many of the same outcomes as the center and corridor strategy. The map you see shows areas already developed as of 2020 in the light gray, with new urban growth in already developed areas in the darkest gray, and new urban growth on the edges of cities and villages in the medium gray. The framework forecasts that 4 out of 10 new households and 1 out of 4 new jobs will occur within already developed areas in the growth scenario that we created for the framework. However, not all of the 200,000 new people that we anticipate coming to the region are going to live in centers, corridors, and in already developed areas. Many will locate at the edge of growing communities. Planning and developing complete neighborhoods then is an important strategy for this category of growth. Complete neighborhoods are more compact with a wide range of housing options mixed with parks, schools, stores, and services, and organized in a walkable pattern. As such, they reduce car travel and farmland converted urban development compared to all large lot, single family housing developments. Finally, there are 3 additional climate-related strategies in the framework that are more site-specific. Encouraging tree preservation and planting, which creates the benefits that Kathy described. Encouraging practices that reduce stormwater runoff, which increases flood resilience and improves ecosystem services. And encouraging practices that reduce surface temperatures to reduce the urban heat island effect and improve health and well-being overall and make the community more resilient. In the end, however, what really matters is carrying out the strategies to meet our goals. In other words, implementation. Performance indicators and metrics are important because they can tell us how we are doing over time with implementation. This is a portion of a table in the regional development framework that shows how indicators and metrics relate to goals, objectives, and strategies. I noted earlier that a key way that land use impacts climate change is through transportation emissions. So that's why we selected this vehicle miles traveled as the indicator and the metric for these strategies and this objective and this goal. Other key climate indicators not shown here are tree canopy cover, stormwater runoff and infiltration, cover crop usage, and urban surface temperature. Okay, as I wrap this up, I want to share a few examples of working towards the framework's climate goals. First is the Green Infrastructure Plan for the Black Earth Creek watershed. Green infrastructure is a nature-based approach that uses soil and vegetation to retain and infiltrate water in urban and rural areas. Because this watershed has experienced repeated flood events, CARPC worked with the villages of Cross Plains, Black Earth, and Mazomanie, the town of Cross Plains, and Wisconsin Emergency Management to obtain a FEMA grant. The grant funded consultants who analyzed the potential for green infrastructure to address flooding risks. They identified strategies that can reduce the peak discharge of large floods, approximately 5 to 10%, reducing building damage and producing a benefit of $10 to $20 million in economic benefits. Here are 3 more examples from different parts of the region. The city of Middleton is working to focus growth along the University Avenue corridor with a corridor plan. The city of Madison has transformed portions of East Washington Avenue from empty and underutilized lots to a vibrant center and corridor. And the village of Wanakee made a major shift in new residential growth patterns with the Heritage Hills neighborhood that meets the framework's criteria of a complete neighborhood. So just a couple more slides here. Some important additional information. The computer model we use for the framework estimated that applying the strategies I presented would reduce per household emissions of greenhouse gas by 7% on average. The model only accounted for land use changes, not changes to the transportation system, such as the planned addition of bus rapid transit. The reduction reflects fewer vehicle miles traveled per household and lower heating and cooling consumption. However, the total transportation and building greenhouse gas emissions in the scenario increase for the region. because basically we're adding 200,000 more people who are living in 83,000 more houses and traveling all around. So the climate action plan calls for eliminating transportation greenhouse gases, in part, as you saw, by reducing total VMT. And this kind of gets to what all you smart people out there already said, which is that this is one of the key challenges we face in meeting our overall climate goals. What this tells us then is that land use changes alone could not eliminate greenhouse gases. The way that buildings and open spaces are arranged on the landscape, it sets the stage for how we get from place to place, what kind of houses we live in, what kind of transportation choices are viable. In other words, it's a necessary but not sufficient means of eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. Fully eliminating greenhouse gas emissions also requires changes to the transportation system. So up next is Bill Schaefer from the Greater Madison MPO to talk about transportation system and climate targets.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. Just some brief background on the Greater Madison MPO. As the designated metropolitan planning organization, we lead the collaborative regional transportation planning process with the adopted mission and vision that you see here. The map shows our official planning boundary, and we have a 14-member policy board with representation from area communities and transportation agencies. There we go. Oops. So the long-range plan is a framework plan that covers all modes of transportation. We update it every 5 years. The plan sets out regional vision and goals, makes recommendations on future projects, studies, and strategies, and also identifies performance measures to gauge progress in achieving planned goals. The regional development framework and regional transportation plan build upon and support each other. The framework recommends future development be located and designed to be transportation efficient and supportive of transportation alternatives to driving, as Steve discussed. The regional transportation plan then supports the framework by recommending multimodal transportation investments and strategies that serve this vision for future growth. There are 6 overarching goals and goal statements guiding the regional transportation plan, including environmental sustainability. All of the other goals depend upon environmental sustainability to some degree, and some impact sustainability directly, such as goals 1, livable communities, and 6, system performance, which promote compact development and transportation demand management. Climate change is one of the 3 critical issues that was identified in the regional transportation plan as an issue that is important to address. And from a transportation standpoint, that means 2 things: reducing transportation's impact by reducing emissions, as well as preparing and adapting the transportation system to withstand changing weather conditions, including more extreme weather events. The plan highlights key drivers of change that could greatly impact climate goals, either positively or negatively. These include connected driverless vehicles, transportation infrastructure and communications technologies, shared mobility, such as ride-hailing or car-sharing services, or bike or scooter sharing, an increase in online shopping, and a likely continued increase in teleworking. These need to be monitored moving forward and policies developed to steer them, particularly in the case of driverless vehicles, in a direction that is more supportive of environmental sustainability. The MPO will be conducting some what-if analyses of these things using our travel model and other policy issues such as road user charges and reporting on those impacts. The MPO's general approach to managing congestion supports environmental sustainability by prioritizing travel demand management and traffic operation strategies over expanding roadway capacity to address future growth. Now turning to the planned future transportation system, which is designed to meet the needs of existing and future residents, businesses, and visitors, while also supporting that environmental sustainability goal as well as other regional goals. This map shows major roadway projects and studies that are recommended. Major state highway projects beyond the two already underway or programmed, which include the Beltline Flex Lanes project and the US 51 reconstruction project, will be identified as part of current major studies of the Beltline, Stoughton Road, and the interstate, as well as a longer-term future study of State Highway 19 corridor. The need for additional capacity will be carefully scrutinized in light of plan goals and our congestion management policies. There are only a few local roadway capacity projects shown in yellow that are planned at this time to serve the future growth. Some local road segments shown with a light blue dashed line have been identified for future evaluation of a potential capacity reduction in order to provide space for bus lane or protected bike facility. Transportation systems management, including intelligent transportation systems, is about actively managing the operation of the transportation system using technology and targeted infrastructure investments to improve travel and safety conditions. Strategies that encourage alternatives to driving and that keep motor vehicles moving through the system can reduce emissions. Examples of these include real-time traffic information, traffic incident response, smart traffic signals, and transit signal priority. The plan includes a recommendation to create a transportation systems management and operations plan to identify projects to improve traffic and transit operations and safety and support modernization of the system to accommodate new and emerging technologies such as connected and automated vehicles. Transitioning away from fossil fuels toward electric powered vehicles represents an important way to decrease transportation related emissions. Expanding access to charging infrastructure, increasing familiarity with electric vehicles, and easing range anxiety are important steps to aid in this transition. This map shows the recommended future transit system in relationship to existing and planned employment and activity centers from the regional framework and the rail corridors, including the primary planned intercity passenger rail route shown in blue. The system includes a bus rapid transit network shown in red, regional commuter express routes in blue, and expanded local service in orange. With service frequency increases, the planned system represents about a doubling of the current service hours of the transit system. This ambitious vision for the future of transit in the Madison area was developed with the intent to greatly expand transit access to jobs and other destinations. Various first and last mile transportation options are discussed in the draft plan. Microtransit will be more fully investigated as part of the upcoming MPO transit development plan process. Ensuring that people have access to the transit system, even if they do not live within a short walk of a transit stop, is important in reducing dependency on private automobiles. This shows the planned regional bikeway network, including primary routes in red and orange and secondary routes in blue. The percentage of the regional bikeway network that is considered low traffic stress, in other words, comfortable for most adult bicyclists, would increase from 55% to 76% under this plan. These are some of the key recommendations of the plan related to the pedestrian network, including improving safety for pedestrians at street crossings and designing or retrofitting existing streets to reduce speeding. Transportation Demand Management, or TDM, aims to reduce driving and roadway congestion by maximizing the availability and use of alternatives to driving alone. The MPO manages a TDM program called Round Trip, which works with individuals, employers, and organizational partners in Dane County to advance TDM goals. The TDM recommendations included in our plan focus on increasing both public and private capacity in the region to implement TDM through a range of planning, policy, and programming strategies. The plan also provides information on and makes recommendations on parking, specialized transportation, interregional travel, and freight. Plan performance measures have been identified both for evaluation of the plan and also to measure progress moving forward in achieving these goals. These are a couple of the metrics on the plan. As shown on the right, daily transit boardings are forecast to increase 74% from 60,000 to around 103,000. While not shown here, the overall share of trips made by transit, bicycling, and walking is forecast to go up, although fairly modestly. However, auto vehicle miles of travel is forecast to increase from 12 million to over 16 million. However, VMT, it should be kept in mind with the VMT increase that this does not account for potential reduced auto ownership as a result of the growth strategy and transit and bike improvements. It also doesn't account for things like shared mobility options and electric bikes. And that is one of the reasons we're going to do some additional travel modeling of some of these things to determine the impacts that those things might have. However, clearly, additional strategies to affect behavioral change, such as road user charges, will be necessary in the future to more significantly reduce VMT growth. The MPO does not design, construct, or operate facilities, but we can encourage and support transportation policies and strategies that help meet our goals, and we can prioritize the funding that we have to allocate for projects that best support those goals. This slide highlights on the left some of the new funding opportunities provided by the recently passed federal infrastructure bill. It also highlights on the right two key funding challenges, including the current prohibition on transit or transportation authorities. And finally, this is a list of programs that the MPO receives federal funding for to allocate for local projects, the amount of funding that we have available on average annually with the new increases under the infrastructure bill. The largest of these by far is the Surface Transportation Block Grant Urban Program, which can be used for almost any capital project as well as TDM programs. In 2021, the MPO revised our scoring metrics to evaluate applications for funding through this major program. We increased the number of points that can be earned by projects which enhance multimodal options or services, and also the number of points that can be earned by a project for expected mode shift away from single occupant driving or for green stormwater facilities. Points are also awarded for projects that support the regional development framework, and projects that reduce congestion through means other than expanding capacity also support the environmental sustainability goal. So that is it for my presentation, and now we're gonna open it up kind of to everyone and talk a little bit about the actions that both the communities, businesses, and individuals can take to reduce emissions and foster resilience at the local level.
Indeed. Thanks, Bill. I'll kick this off. So when we think about the things local governments can do, you know, one of the most important things that all of our allies in local government on this call can do is lead by example in your own operations. We've got a picture there of the village of McFarland's new public safety facility that's going to be net zero energy. You know, the more examples we have of local government leading, the faster everyone else comes after us. And I earlier talked about making it easier, but these examples are maybe good ones for Steve. Why don't you talk through this?
Sure, thanks, Kathy. Yeah, the regional development framework, as I presented, does lay out options for and strategies that local governments can employ that will make it easier for businesses to make sustainable choices. But in more specific ways that governments can help carry out those strategies is through their role in the development process. They play a key role through the rules and plans and the rules that they adopt and set. So the comprehensive plan and related plans like pedestrian plans and open space plans are really important to look at as those are updated to ensure that they're consistent with and designed to carry out the regional development strategies. In addition, beyond the plans are codes, land use codes, zoning and subdivision ordinances in particular, which actually set the rules for how development can take place. And those need to allow and make it easier to carry out those strategies and for developers and builders to conform to the strategies in the regional development framework.
Indeed. So all important stuff for our local governments to be thinking about. And then everyone should know it's me having trouble with the mouse. Caitlin did everything right. So in terms of business partners, one of the big things I want to push, there's a link to this on our website. We have a tool where businesses can very easily calculate the emissions of their business and then look at focusing on the top 2 or 3 ways to reduce those emissions. In our local economy, where an awful lot of businesses are knowledge-based businesses, you're going to see that one of your biggest climate impacts is your employee commuting. So very much tied to some of the things we've been talking about. Obviously, there's the opportunity to be more efficient as a business, but we also really want to highlight that you can make it easier for your employees and customers to make sustainable choices.
And as I mentioned, the MPO has a round trip program to support both businesses and individuals in promoting options to driving alone, both for work as well as for other options. And Zia just posted the link to that website.
And of course, where you site your facility matters here too, kind of tied back to the things Steve was talking about. And I know there's been some discussion in the questions about citing things that, yeah, all very important. I'll just do a plug that Zoe's Pizzeria, which delivers in electric vehicles, is a climate champion. See how you get famous by doing this stuff? You end up in the final set of, is we're all, when we take off those hats of local government or business or nonprofit leaders, we're all individuals. And I really like this framework that climate scientist Kimberly Nicholas has offered about how we all have multiple ways to flex our climate superpowers. We're all consumers, so we're making choices about what we buy, where we live, how we move around. Those are all really important choices. Many of us are investors. We have retirement funds of one sort or another, and that's another way that you have an impact in these markets, whether you're investing in fossil fuels or clean energy choices. We're all role models. We all have that ability to talk to our friends and family about the issues that matter to us here, to thank businesses and local governments for their leadership. In our roles as employees or students, we have the ability to be part of the change inside those organizations. So much of the work we recognize in Dane County is inspired by employees inside organizations. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. And similarly, we all have really important roles as community members to be letting your local government officials know what you care about here, to be, we all like this term, a YIMBY, someone who's saying, yes, in my backyard, I want these sustainable choices in my neighborhood. This is important to me. So all of those kind of options to be part of this. And with that, we've got contact information for all of us there. We maybe have a little bit of time for questions. I'll turn things back to Ben.
All right. Looks like we've got a lot of questions answered already in writing. So for those who are interested, click on your Q&A and click over to answered, and you'll be able to see what has already been answered on those questions, and we still have 6 open questions. I think some of these might get into some really detailed responses that will take longer than we can really get to in this. And so maybe anonymous attendee, if you can provide some contact information, you've got some really detailed questions, and we can follow up with the more detailed answers that you're looking for, such as who is tracking RNG exchange, and is there a third-party verifier? Unless you can weigh in right away, Kathy, I think we probably move on. Okay.
Yeah. I think it would be easier for me to answer that in more detail offline. Yeah.
Great. From Doug Wood, we've got, can you discuss climate change value of new local workforce housing, given the rapidly increasing cost of local housing that's pushing ordinary workers out to rural areas and neighboring counties? I'm thinking this is probably going to be a Kathy or Steve question.
Yeah, I'll jump in and take a stab at it at first. Clearly, rapidly rising housing costs is a key challenge for all across the state and the nation, and particularly in our region as well, due to the rapid growth. And it really to take that on involves both producing enough new housing to meet the growing demand as people are moving into the region, and subsidizing housing to make it affordable for the people who can't afford even the market rate, can't afford those market rate homes, which is a growing portion of the population. And so, yes, putting in more workforce and affordable housing in areas like along corridors and in centers, I think is key to the regional development strategy, and does have the climate benefits that you talked about. So that's my input.
And I would just, agree there. Yeah, that, and certainly I think as we're looking at affordable housing, we really need to think that affordable housing has to be affordable in terms of rent, but it also has to be affordable in terms of utilities and in transportation to work and school from that house. So we've got to really maximize affordability as we're moving forward in this.
And just to note that locating in centers and corridors and places like that decreases transportation and building energy costs. So overall, that's another way that it can contribute to making housing more affordable.
Okay, we've got a couple more from our anonymous attendee that are, again, quite in depth. I'm going to jump over to Catherine Holt, who has her hands up, or a hand up. I think we can get her unmuted.
Yes, I will work on that. Just 1 second. All right, Kevin, you should be allowed to talk.
I just pushed the wrong button, sorry.
Oh. No worries.
All right, that was an easy one. All right, from David Lonsdorf, does a prairie sequester as much carbon as a similar sized forest?
So I don't have precise data, David, but I have heard multiple speakers now in other discussions say yes to that question, that prairies essentially sequester comparable carbon to a forest. The trick is the prairie is doing most of that sequestering underground. I mean, that's the sort of thing about the prairie. You only see kind of the tip of the iceberg there. There was a question up here about local governments pursuing ways to encourage net zero energy building for new developments. And I would say, our office works closely with a number of local governments on these issues, and folks are exploring ways to do that don't, in Wisconsin, only the state can set the building code. Local communities cannot set a higher building code than the state building code, which is the least efficient building you can legally build in Wisconsin. Whenever I say code, that's what you should think. But folks are looking at ways, and certainly with our Climate Champion program, we have a new building design category where we're recognizing entities that are building to a much higher standard. You know, that's the space we're in sort of right now in terms of that.
All right, looks like Kathy's also working on writing some responses to our anonymous attendee. Again, a lot of really in-depth questions there. I don't know that anybody here necessarily has the expertise to answer a lot of those, but I can tell you that we are, again, the tip of the iceberg of who's working on this, and not necessarily the engineers or the super smart people. You know, we're reasonably intelligent here, but I don't know that anybody here is going to be able to give some of these very in-depth answers.
And there was one of the questions that the anonymous attendee asked, I thought that might be worth touching on a little bit, which was, can you talk about the lessons we've learned from failing to meet 2020 targets, et cetera. And it's more generally a question about, you know, what do we do when we're looking at these targets? And when we did the run through as panelists, one of the things we observed and talked among ourselves was that there are some of the targets, and as Kathy discussed earlier, that we are exceeding and moving faster on than expected, you know, like the electricity being converted to renewable sources and EV uptake, and others that are stubborn and slow, like we talked about with VMT. And the observation that I think it's useful to share that we had was that this is an iterative and learning process and needs to be continuously updated. And that the important thing is, you know, not to get too frustrated and too blocked from pursuing ideas and strategies to tackle those more stubborn challenges, but to do what we can and what we know and learn from that, and take advantage of new technologies as they emerge and new policies and new funding opportunities, because things shift and change, and be ready to take advantage of the new opportunities as they emerge, like has happened with solar.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe just to add to that, you know, and I mentioned this briefly, the way COVID prompted us to rethink telework and remote meetings and a variety of things that I think were virtual healthcare. We're really only at the beginning of understanding how some of that might have long-term implications for our transportation habits. So we need to be ready to leverage all of those opportunities and pursue all of these pieces. I think, you know, overall, well, yes, it would be terrific if we had a lot more done faster. We're also in Dane County, we're on track to accomplish what we need to accomplish in this decade. And it's going to be hard. There's a lot of heavy lifting here, but it's not insurmountable. And so, you know, I think it's important for people to have a level of optimism. You know, we have here in Dane County the first net zero energy public school in the United States. It's still the largest net zero energy public school. Okay, it might not have been the first in the US. It was the first in Wisconsin. That's Forest Edge in the Oregon school district. You know, it is producing more energy every year than it uses for all of its operations. All of this is possible. We've just got to work together to get it done.
All right, well, we've gone over a little bit here. I want to thank everybody for your participation. We are going to take note of the questions we didn't get to answering and try to at least put together some responses and references so you can dig deeper into those if you'd like, and we'll get that out to everybody who registered for this webinar. So on behalf of all of us at the Office of Energy and Climate Change, RPC, and at the MPO, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for today's webinar, and hope that it's given you ideas about how our communities, businesses, and selves can make meaningful changes to mitigate or reduce climate change impacts. Please reach out with any questions or data requests. We'll be happy to help. Stay tuned for future topic-specific webinars, which we plan to host on a bi-monthly basis. Have a great day, and thanks again for attending today's webinar.